Arizona, New Mexico borderlands, 1873. The sun bled red over the jagged mesas, painting the desert like a battlefield. Heat shimmered off the sand even in early dawn. Every step Ayanna took left a faint print that the wind tried to erase, but she knew the men behind her would not be fooled. They were seasoned hunters, of people, not animals, and the thunder of their horses carried a message she understood too well. They would rather see her dead than free. Ayanna's lungs burned. Her moccasins, torn days ago, barely shielded her feet from the stones. Dried blood crusted along her ankle where an iron shackle had once cut deep. The memory of that shackle, the weight, the cold bite of metal, made her run harder. She glanced back and saw dust rising on the horizon. They were closing in. She slipped behind a cluster of mesquite bushes, pressing herself to the cracked earth. A rattlesnake coiled nearby, its tongue tasting the air. Ayanna remained still as stone, the sweat dripping from her brow to the sand below. She whispered a prayer in Apache under her breath, a promise to the spirits of her ancestors. I will not be taken again. The memory struck hard and fast, flashes of fire and gunshots, the screams of her people when Wells' men stormed their camp, her mother's arms shoving her into the shadows, the smell of blood thick in the night. They had called her wild, a word they spat like poison, but what they wanted was her spirit, her labor, her submission. They had failed. Her escape had cost her dearly, but she would rather die beneath the open sky than rot in the darkness of that labor camp. The voices of the men grew louder now, echoing over the rocks. "Spread out! She can't be far!" one shouted. Another laughed, a cruel sound that made her grip the stone in her hand tighter. She crept along the edge of the arroyo, keeping low, her body a part of the earth. Her breath was steady despite the pounding of her heart. She had learned from her elders that silence and patience could outmatch any gun. Suddenly, a hoofbeat clattered close, too close. A rider's shadow loomed over the ridge above her. Ayanna's instinct screamed. She hurled the stone with the force of survival. It struck the rider's temple, knocking him sideways. His horse reared, neighing, sand flying in every direction. Ayanna bolted, darting down a narrow path that twisted between boulders. Bullets cracked in the air behind her. One ricocheted off a rock, showering her with grit. She did not look back. Her legs carried her like wind over dry riverbeds and thorny cactus fields. She reached a rocky incline and scrambled upward, her fingers finding desperate holds. At the crest, she paused, panting, scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, a faint curl of smoke rose. Civilization, or at least a chance to disappear among strangers. But first, she needed to lose her pursuers. Ayanna crouched, scanning the tracks she'd left. Too clear, too easy to follow. She remembered the old tricks her uncle taught her, how to double back, how to drag a branch to sweep the sand. With quick, practiced hands, she broke a limb from a mesquite bush and began erasing her trail. Then she slipped into a shallow cave, crouching low, waiting as the sun crept higher. The cave was small and stifling, but it hid her well. She waited. Minutes passed. Then came the voice again, closer than she hoped. "Wells wants her alive. Don't lose her, boys. She's worth more than a dozen horses." The name, Wells, stabbed like a knife. Harrison Wells, the man who turned her people into slaves, who wore a smile as cold as the steel chains he dealt. Her body stiffened with hate and fear. She gripped a jagged stone. If they found her, she would fight. She would not go back. Ayanna drew a long breath, steadying herself. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of horses and sweat. She knew they were closing in. Her time in the cave was over. Crawling out into the burning light, she fixed her eyes on that thin curl of smoke on the horizon. Freedom or death lay in that direction. 2 days later, the border town of Dry Creek. The desert wind carried the smell of sweat, horses, and cheap whiskey through Dry Creek, a town that seemed to have grown from dust and despair. Its main street was little more than a strip of hard-packed dirt lined with sun-faded wooden buildings, a saloon leaning slightly to one side, a sheriff's office with broken shutters, a general store that hadn't seen a new shipment in months. The Civil War had ended nearly a decade ago, but for towns like Dry Creek, the fight never truly left. Law and order were thin as paper here, and men like Harrison Wells knew how to rip that paper to shreds. Wyatt Callahan stepped off the weathered porch of the livery stable, wiping his hands on a rag. The Texas sun had darkened his skin and turned the creases around his eyes into permanent lines. His broad shoulders bore the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much war and had chosen silence over bitterness. At 35, Wyatt was still tall and sturdy, though the limp in his left leg told a story of a bullet wound from Shiloh, a story he rarely shared. He had come to Dry Creek for supplies, nails for fencing, grain for his horses, maybe a flask of coffee if the store had any left. He wanted nothing more than to get back to his ranch, a patch of stubborn land near the San Pedro River, where the wide sky and quiet fields gave him something close to peace. But the crowd gathering near the saloon caught his attention. A makeshift platform had been set up. 3 men stood on it, all of them wearing dust-stained coats and pistols slung low. Wyatt recognized the leader, Harrison Wells, a man whose reputation stank worse than the slaughterhouse on a hot day. Wells had made a fortune moving cargo, as he called it, but everyone knew what that meant: human lives, stolen and sold like cattle. Curiosity, or maybe a sense of duty, pulled Wyatt closer. He pushed his hat back slightly and scanned the platform. Then he saw her, Ayanna. She stood barefoot, wrists shackled, her dark hair braided but matted with dust. Her eyes, black, sharp, and burning, met Wyatt's for only a second before flicking away, but it was enough to cut through him. She wasn't broken, not yet. Even with chains biting her skin, she stood straight, her chin lifted, as though daring the world to look at her and see something other than a thing for sale. "Step right up, folks," Wells' voice boomed. He smiled like a snake. "This here is a strong Apache girl, fast, tough, worth every dollar. She's been tamed enough to work without complaint. Perfect for the mines, or maybe your ranch. She won't give you no trouble once you show her who's boss." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ayanna didn't flinch, but Wyatt noticed how tightly her jaw clenched. She was young, no more than 20, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of battles far older than her years. "$20 to start," Wells barked. "Who'll give me 20 for this fine piece of property?" Wyatt felt his stomach turn. Property. He hated that word when it was tied to a human life. Memories of the war flooded back, the ragged lines of freed slaves he'd helped guide to safety, the hollow faces of men and women who had been treated worse than animals. He thought of his younger brother, Patrick, who had died with a Bible in his hand, saying, "We're all God's children, Wyatt. Don't forget that." The bidding started. 10 men raised their hands, their voices loud, casual, cruel. Wyatt said nothing at first. He could turn away. It wasn't his fight. But when one of Wells' men shoved Ayanna, making her stumble on the platform, Wyatt stepped forward. 50, he said, his voice low but firm. The crowd went quiet. Wells turned, his smile fading slightly. $50, eh? That's a generous offer for an untamed girl, mister." "Callahan," Wyatt answered, "and I'll pay cash." No one else countered. Wells grinned again, but there was a sharpness in his eyes now, a flicker of calculation. "Sold," he said, and the word rang like a verdict. Ayanna looked at Wyatt, confusion flickering in her eyes. She didn't thank him. Why would she? To her, he was just another buyer, another jailer. Wyatt walked up to the platform, holding the money in one hand. "Take the chains off her," he told Wells' man. "Careful, Callahan," the man sneered. "She bites." "Then I'll bite back," Wyatt said flatly. The chains fell with a metallic clatter. Ayanna rubbed her raw wrists, but didn't move. Wyatt tipped his hat slightly. "You're free to go," he told her quietly. "I don't own you. I just didn't like the look of them dogs selling you like a mule." She narrowed her eyes, mistrusting every word. Freedom was not something she believed in anymore, not easily. She said nothing, but her gaze followed him as he turned and began walking toward his horse. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. The Callahan Ranch sat in a shallow valley of dust and stubborn grass, the kind that only grew where rain was too rare to be trusted. Wyatt Callahan had built his home there with his own hands, each board and nail a quiet testament to survival. It wasn't much, a single-story house with a tin roof that groaned when the wind swept down from the hills, but it was steady, solid, and his. When he brought Ayanna through the gate that morning, the horses stirred, stamping the ground and flicking their ears as though they could sense the wildfire still burning in her. She stood barefoot on the hard-packed earth, a worn blanket over her shoulders, her wrists raw from the shackles that Wyatt had cut loose. She looked at the land with guarded eyes, as if even the open sky could be a trap. "Water's there," Wyatt said simply, pointing to a bucket drawn fresh from the well. He didn't step closer. He had learned long ago, in battlefields where the wrong move could get a man shot, that sometimes the safest thing you could offer someone was space. Ayanna didn't answer. She crouched by the well, dipped her hands into the water, and drank as though it might vanish if she took too long. Her face, framed by braids of black hair streaked with dust, held the hardness of someone who had seen too much. Every movement was deliberate, every glance sharp. Wyatt could almost feel the tension radiating from her, like a bowstring drawn tight. He gave her food, setting it on the porch rather than handing it directly. "You can eat, or you can leave. No one's holding you here," he said. His voice was even, though his heart stirred with a quiet anger at the thought of men like Harrison Wells, men who saw people as cattle to be traded. Wyatt had fought a war to stop such things, though he wasn't sure anymore if war had stopped anything at all. For the first day, Ayanna stayed silent. She ate sparingly, kept to the edge of the ranch, and slept beneath the open sky with a knife she had fashioned from a broken horseshoe. At night, Wyatt heard her turn restlessly, muttering words in her language, words he didn't understand, but which carried a weight of grief. On the second morning, he found her near the corral, standing still as the breeze, her hand outstretched toward his gray mare. The animal, usually wary of strangers, stepped closer to her without fear. Wyatt watched from a distance, not daring to interrupt. Ayanna's fingers brushed the mare's neck, and for a moment her guarded expression softened. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't made of stone. "You handle horses," he said, breaking the silence. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing, as if weighing whether to answer. "My people know horses," she said at last, her voice low and rough, as though the English words tasted strange in her mouth. Wyatt nodded. "Then maybe you'll teach me something I don't know." That night they sat by the fire outside. Wyatt cooked beans and cornbread, and though Ayanna didn't say much, she watched him carefully, as if trying to read the truth in his movements. He offered her a plate. She hesitated, then took it without a word. In the flickering light, the scars on her wrists and arms were visible. Thin lines, some fresh, some old, each one a story he could only guess at. He didn't ask, not yet. The desert nights carried a chill that sank deep into the bones, a reminder that even the harshest days could end in silence. Wyatt sat on the porch, a lantern glowing beside him, watching the horizon darken to shades of indigo and black. Somewhere out there, coyotes sang their mournful songs. Inside the barn, Ayanna slept on a pile of hay, though sleep was too generous a word. He had heard her whispers, the sudden gasps, the way she flinched at the creak of wood or the slam of a gate. It was the third night when he woke to the sound of her screaming. Wyatt rushed into the barn, boots crunching against the dirt. Ayanna thrashed in her sleep, her hands clawing at the air as though fighting unseen chains. "No, not again! Leave him! No!" The words came in her native tongue, but the terror needed no translation. Wyatt knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. "Ayanna," he said gently, "you're safe. It's over. You're here now." She jolted awake, eyes wide, sweat running down her temples. For a moment she looked ready to strike him, but then she recognized where she was. She turned away, breathing hard, ashamed of her weakness. "Nightmares?" Wyatt asked, his voice low. She didn't respond. Instead, she sat hugging her knees, staring at the barn wall as though seeing another world. After a long silence, she spoke in a whisper. "They came before dawn. My people were sleeping. I heard the screams first. The fire, it spread so fast. I tried to take my brother, but they dragged us apart. I never saw him again." Her voice cracked on the last words. Wyatt's heart tightened. He thought of his younger brother, Samuel, who had fallen at Antietam. The memory of that battlefield, mud, blood, and prayers whispered by dying men, still haunted him. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, "losing someone you'd give your life for. I watched my brother bleed out while the sky turned red. I asked God why he would take him and leave me. I never got an answer, not the one I wanted." Ayanna looked at him then, her dark eyes glimmering with something softer than anger, something like understanding. Later, they sat by a small campfire outside. Wyatt poked the embers, trying to find the right words. "I used to believe the world was simple," he began. "Good men, bad men, but I've seen too much to believe it's ever that easy." From the saddlebag beside him, he took out a small leather Bible, its edges worn. He flipped it open and read softly, more to himself than to her. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Ayanna tilted her head, listening. "That's your God?" "Yes," Wyatt said. "Even when I don't understand him, I try to trust him. Maybe that's the only reason I'm still here." For the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she asked, "Does your God listen to people like me?" Wyatt closed the Bible. "I think he listens to everyone who's hurting." They sat there until the fire burned low, two souls bound by scars that neither of them could see but both could feel. The days rolled by in quiet rhythm on the ranch. Wyatt repaired fences, tended to the horses, and tried to pretend that life had returned to something like peace. Ayanna helped, though she rarely spoke. Her presence was like the wind across the mesa, silent but unyielding. She carried herself with the wariness of a hunted animal, always watching the horizon, always expecting danger. That danger came sooner than either of them expected. It was mid-afternoon when Wyatt spotted a trail of dust rising in the distance. He shaded his eyes and cursed under his breath. Riders, 3 of them, moving with purpose. Ayanna saw them too. Her face went pale, though her jaw tightened in defiance. "Wells' men," she murmured. Her voice was a low growl, like the rumble of distant thunder. Wyatt felt his stomach knot.
He had hoped Wells would give up the chase after losing her, but men like Wells didn't forget or forgive. They treated people as property, and Ayanna was their most valuable prize. The riders approached slowly, their horses kicking up clouds of ochre dust. Wyatt recognized the one in front, Seth Roke, a lanky brute with cold, yellowish eyes and a scar running across his cheek. He dismounted with a lazy confidence that made Wyatt's hand twitch toward the shotgun leaning on the fence. "Afternoon, Callahan," Roke said, his grin revealing crooked teeth. "Heard you picked yourself up a stray, a fine one, too. Our boss wants her back. You know, the girl." Wyatt stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly in the dry earth. "She's not yours to take." Roke chuckled. "Not mine, maybe, but Wells paid good money to have her broken in. You don't want to cross him, Callahan. Folks who do, they don't last long out here." Ayanna's hands clenched at her sides, but she stood tall, meeting Roke's gaze without fear. "Tell Wells I'm no one's property," she spat in accented English. The grin faded from Roke's face. "Fiery little thing, ain't she? Boss says she's worth a fortune. Strong, stubborn. We'll make this easy. Step aside, Callahan. Don't make me take her by force." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "You'll leave my land now. If I see you or Wells anywhere near this ranch again, I won't hesitate." His voice was calm, but the edge in it cut like steel. For a moment, the air grew heavy, thick with unspoken threats. Rourke finally tipped his hat and mounted his horse. "You'll regret this," he said. "Wells don't like to be denied. Enjoy your last few quiet nights." The three men rode off, leaving a trail of dust and tension behind them. As the hoofbeats faded, Ayanna turned to Wyatt. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice trembling. "Now they'll come for you, too. I should leave." Wyatt shook his head. "You think running will stop men like Wells? You're safe here, and I'm not the kind of man who stands by while someone gets hunted like an animal." She looked at him, torn between gratitude and fear. "They will come, and when they do, blood will follow." Wyatt glanced toward the distant hills, where the sun was beginning to sink behind jagged peaks. He felt a chill settle over him, a warning that the fight was just beginning. The tension lingered like a storm cloud long after Wells' men disappeared into the distance. Ayanna avoided Wyatt's gaze as they walked back to the ranch house. She moved with quick, deliberate steps, her shoulders stiff, as if bracing for a blow that hadn't yet come. That night, Wyatt found her outside, sitting on a log near the corral. The moonlight turned her black hair silver, and her expression was unreadable. She held a knife in her hands, running her thumb along the worn handle, though her thoughts were clearly far away. "You planning on cutting me loose in my sleep?" Wyatt asked lightly, leaning against the fence post. Ayanna didn't look at him. "I don't trust men who try to save me," she said after a long pause. "Men who say they want nothing in return. There's always a price." Wyatt walked closer, his boots crunching softly in the dirt. "You don't owe me anything, Ayanna, not a single thing. I couldn't stand there and watch them treat you like that." Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes sharp as flint. "Then why risk your life? You don't know me." "I don't need to," he said simply. "I've seen enough cruelty in my life to know when someone's being wronged. And I've got no patience for men like Wells." Ayanna studied him for a moment longer, then let out a breath. "You talk like my grandfather. He used to say a warrior's heart is measured not by who he fights, but by who he protects." Wyatt smiled faintly. "He sounds like a wise man." The next morning, Ayanna rose before dawn. She found Wyatt in the barn, checking the saddles. Without a word, she picked up a rifle from the rack and held it out to him. "Teach me," she said. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "You know how to fight. I've seen it." "Not like you," she replied. "If Wells comes, I don't want to hide. I want to stand." There was no arguing with the determination in her eyes. Wyatt nodded and took her outside. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe steady before pulling the trigger, how to line up the sight. Her hands were steady, her stance strong. The first shot hit the target square in the chest. "Not bad," he said. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "In my tribe, women hunt too." Later, as they worked on the ranch together, Ayanna's guardedness began to soften.
She helped Wyatt mend the old wooden fences, showing him Apache knots that held tighter than his usual ties. When he struggled with a stubborn mare, Ayanna stepped in, whispering softly in her native tongue until the horse calmed. Wyatt couldn't help but watch her, fascinated by the quiet strength she carried in every movement. One evening, as they sat by a small campfire behind the ranch, Wyatt pulled out a worn Bible from his coat pocket. He thumbed through the pages before reading softly from Psalms. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Ayanna tilted her head. "Your God, He gives you courage?" Wyatt looked into the flames. "He gives me hope. After the war, I thought I'd lost everything. But somehow, I believe there's still light ahead. Maybe that's why I met you." Ayanna said nothing, but her eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she turned back to the fire. The desert air grew colder as autumn edged its way into the high plains. One evening, as the last light bled from the horizon, Ayanna and Wyatt rode back to the ranch after checking the far pasture. The trail was quiet, too quiet, until Ayanna's ears caught something faint, a ragged breath, a whimper carried by the wind. "Stop," she whispered, raising her hand. Wyatt pulled on the reins, scanning the brush along the trail. At first, there was nothing but sage and shadow. Then Ayanna dismounted, crouching low, her fingers brushing the dusty ground. A set of small footprints led toward a cluster of rocks. "Someone's here," she murmured. Behind the rocks, they found him, a boy no more than 10 years old, curled into himself like a wounded animal. His clothes were torn, his face caked with dirt and blood. Ayanna knelt beside him, speaking softly in Apache. The boy flinched, eyes wide with terror. But when she switched to broken Spanish, his breath hitched as if recognizing a lifeline. "¿Cómo te llamas?" she asked gently. "Gabe," he whispered hoarsely. Wyatt crouched down. "He's hurt bad," he said, seeing the bruises along the boy's arms, the angry scars crisscrossing his back, whip marks, raw and brutal. Ayanna's jaw tightened. She knew those marks. They were the same scars carved into the souls of those who'd survived Wells Camp. As they carried Gabe back to the ranch, Ayanna felt an anger simmering deep in her chest. The boy's eyes, hollow and wary, reminded her of her younger brother, taken during the raid on her tribe, his fate unknown. Inside the cabin, Wyatt cleaned the boy's wounds with warm water and bandages, while Ayanna prepared a simple broth. Gabe ate in silence, his hands shaking. Every sudden noise made him flinch. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a breath. "Men with black coats, they took others, kids like me. We worked until—" His words broke off into a sob. Ayanna placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. "No one will hurt you here." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure they were true. That night, while Gabe slept curled up by the fire, Ayanna stood outside, staring at the dark ridge to the east. Wyatt joined her, his hat in his hands. "You think he came from Wells' camp?" Wyatt said quietly. "I know he did," Ayanna replied, her voice sharp with conviction. "Those scars, the way he looks at every shadow, he's one of them." Wyatt sighed. "If Wells is snatching kids now, we're not just talking about one gang's cruelty."
This is bigger and meaner. Ayanna turned to face him. "We can't leave them. There are more children out there. I can't—" Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "I can't let them suffer like my people did." Wyatt studied her for a long moment. He saw not just pain, but fire in her eyes, the kind that wouldn't die quietly. "You're thinking of going after them," he said. "Yes," she answered simply. "With or without you." Wyatt looked down at his calloused hands, at the scars on his own knuckles, then back at her. "I swore I'd never fight another war. But maybe this isn't a war. Maybe it's just the right thing to do." In the quiet that followed, a cold wind swept across the plains, rattling the dry leaves. It felt like the land itself was waiting for their next move. The night was long and restless. Gabe tossed in his sleep, murmuring fragments of nightmares, while the wind rattled the shutters like an unending whisper. Wyatt sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the flame of the lantern. Across from him, Ayanna sharpened a hunting knife, the steady rasp of steel on stone echoing the tension between them.
"We can't wait," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Wells will come. He'll send men for Gabe, and for me." Wyatt rubbed his temples, his tired eyes meeting hers. "I know he will, but storming his camp with just the two of us, that's not a plan, that's a death wish." "Then we make a plan," she said, her voice unwavering. "We find out where they're keeping the others, we gather proof of what he's done, and we end this. If we bring his crimes to the marshal or the army, they'll have no choice but to act." Wyatt leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You think the law will care? This is the borderlands, Ayanna. Wells owns half the men who wear a badge out here." "Then we do it ourselves," her dark eyes burned. "I won't leave those children to rot. I can't." For a moment, Wyatt saw her not as the frightened fugitive he'd met at the auction, but as a warrior, like the ones he'd once fought beside during the war, the kind who would rather die standing than live on their knees. Something inside him shifted. "You're not doing this alone," he said, his voice firm. "If we go together." Ayanna's life paused mid-stroke. She looked up at him, the hard lines of her face softening. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why risk your life for this?" Wyatt's gaze fell to the scars on his hands, memories of war flickering like ghosts in his mind. "Because I've been where Gabe is now, not in chains, but in my heart, lost, angry, ready to give up, and someone with faith pulled me back. Maybe this is my chance to do the same." She didn't answer, but the way she looked at him, for the first time, carried trust instead of suspicion. They began preparing at dawn. Wyatt retrieved an old rifle from under the floorboards, cleaning the barrel with deliberate care. Ayanna checked the saddlebags, filling them with bullets, jerky, and water skins. "Teach me," she said suddenly, handing him the rifle. Wyatt raised a brow. "Teach you? How to shoot like you. I can track, I can fight, but I've never held a rifle like this." He smiled faintly. "Then we start now." Out in the back pasture, the rising sun cast gold light across the frost. Wyatt stood behind Ayanna, adjusting her grip, guiding her stance. "Feet apart, lean forward a bit. Don't fight the kick, let it roll through you." She exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, shattering the morning silence and streaking a tin can clean off the fence post. Wyatt grinned. "Natural," he said. Ayanna allowed herself a brief smile, but her eyes soon hardened. "How many men does Wells have?" "Too many,"
Wyatt admitted. "But we're not going in guns blazing. We'll find his camp, get the evidence, and get out. If things go bad," he paused, "we fight like hell." She nodded once, the determination in her posture unshakable. That evening, as they packed the horses, Gabe clung to Ayana's side. "Don't leave me," he whispered. She crouched down, brushing a hand over his tangled hair. "I'll come back," she promised softly, "and when I do, no one will ever hurt you again." Wyatt tightened the cinch on his saddle, watching her with quiet respect. As they mounted up, he murmured a verse he hadn't spoken in years, almost like a prayer. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The trail ahead stretched dark and uncertain. But for the first time, Wyatt felt that maybe God had brought Ayana into his life for this very reason, to fight a battle neither of them could face alone. The desert night was a sheet of black velvet, pricked with the cold fire of stars. A thin moon hung low, casting long, pale shadows across the arid plains. Wyatt Callahan tightened his grip on the reins, feeling the steady pulse of his horse beneath him. Each hoofbeat echoed like a drum in the silence. The air carried a sharp chill, mixed with the dry scent of mesquite and dust. Beside him rode Ayana, her dark braids glinting faintly under the starlight. She rode bareback, silent as a shadow, her posture tense but graceful. Behind them, Gabe clung to the saddle, his small hands trembling around the worn leather horn. The boy's breathing was shallow, his face pale. He had insisted on coming. "They'll hurt more children," he had whispered earlier. "I can show you where." Wyatt glanced at Ayana. Her eyes, black as obsidian, were fixed on the horizon. She hadn't spoken since they left the ranch. Her silence felt heavy, like a vow. In his heart, Wyatt understood why. Tonight was a return to the place of her nightmares.
"We either walk away with them tonight," Wyatt said softly, breaking the stillness, "or we don't walk away at all." Ayana's head tilted slightly, acknowledging his words. She looked ahead, jaw tight. "No more chains," she murmured, voice low and steady. "Not for me, not for them." They rode hard through the night, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. The trail ahead cut through a narrow arroyo, the walls of sandstone glowing faintly under the moonlight. Gabe pointed with a shaking hand. "The camp's that way, beyond the ridge. They keep the cages near the mine entrance." Wyatt felt a knot tighten in his gut. He thought of the horrors Gabe had described, children treated like livestock, beaten until they obeyed. His hand brushed the revolver at his side. He had fought battles before, but this one felt different. This one was personal. Ayana slowed her horse as they approached a rise in the land. She dismounted with the quiet ease of a hunter, scanning the dark shapes on the horizon. "2 guards," she whispered, crouching low. "We'll need to move silent. I'll take the left side." Wyatt nodded.
He took a deep breath, murmuring a short prayer under his breath. "Lord, guide our steps." The wind picked up, whispering through the dry brush. The night was ready to explode. The compound lay nestled in the jagged maw of an abandoned mine, its silhouette black against the pale shimmer of the desert moon. The wooden watchtower creaked in the wind, a single lantern swaying from a beam. 2 guards stood near the entrance, rifles slung across their shoulders, their voices rough with whiskey and boredom. Beyond them, faint cries and the rattle of chains whispered through the night air. Ayana crouched low behind a cluster of rocks, her breathing shallow but controlled. Her sharp eyes traced every movement of the guards, reading their patterns as easily as she would follow tracks in the sand. "They switch sides every few minutes," she murmured to Wyatt, who crouched beside her. "We'll need to move when their backs turn." Wyatt studied the terrain, broken fences, discarded mining carts, and the half-collapsed shaft that led deeper into the compound. His gut churned at the thought of what lay inside. "We stick to the shadows," he whispered.
"Gabe, stay between us." The boy nodded, his small frame trembling, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination. He had been here before. His scars bore witness to every lash, every scream that echoed in these walls. "There's a tunnel," Gabe whispered, pointing to a narrow gap where timbers had rotted away. "It leads to the cages." Ayana's gaze softened for a moment as she looked at the boy. Then, like a blade being drawn, her focus sharpened again. She signaled Wyatt, and together they crawled low across the dust, using the jagged rocks and rusted wagons as cover. The sound of boots crunching on gravel above them made Wyatt freeze, his hand instinctively going to his revolver. But Ayana shook her head. No gunfire, not yet. The entrance to the mine loomed ahead, dark and gaping like the mouth of some dead beast. The stench hit them first, a rancid mixture of sweat, blood, and rotting wood. Ayana clenched her teeth, memories crashing over her like a storm. She remembered the sting of the whip, the searing burn of the iron shackles, the voice of Vaughn sneering, "We'll break you yet, girl." Wyatt saw her flinch, just for a second. He touched her arm, grounding her. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "Tonight we take it back." The three slipped inside the mine's shadows, the walls damp and cold. In the distance, a lantern flickered, casting cruel bars of light across the floor. The faint sobs of children grew louder, pulling them deeper into the heart of darkness. The narrow tunnel opened into a wider chamber, the ceiling supported by rotting beams that groaned with every gust of wind. The flicker of lantern light revealed rows of crude wooden cages, their bars forged from scavenged iron rails. Inside, huddled forms stirred, a half-dozen children, their eyes wide and hollow, their faces streaked with grime and tears. Ayana's breath caught in her throat. The sight pulled her backward through time, back to the night of fire and screams when her own tribe had been torn apart. She stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling. "It's all right," she whispered in Apache, her voice low and soothing. "We're here to take you home." The children recoiled at first, pressing into the shadows of their cages. Fear had carved deep lines into their young faces. One boy, no older than 8, clutched a piece of rope as if it were a lifeline. "They said they'd come back with the whip if we made a sound," he stammered. Wyatt knelt beside Ayana, his voice calm but firm. "They won't hurt you anymore," he promised. His calloused hands worked at the iron locks, the metal scraping against his knife blade. "We're getting you out of here." Gabe crouched beside a little girl whose cheeks were streaked with dried blood. He reached out, showing her his own scars, as if to say, "I've been where you are." She blinked at him, hesitated, then finally took his hand. Ayana's instincts flared. Footsteps echoed faintly from the tunnel behind them. "We have to hurry," she said sharply. Her hands moved fast, breaking thin ropes and forcing locks with a crowbar Wyatt had found leaning against the wall. One by one, the children slipped free. Some were too weak to stand. Ayana lifted a small boy with ribs like bird cages, holding him close as if to shield him from the memory of this place. Her heart ached, but there was no time for sorrow. "Wyatt, we need to move now." He nodded, shoving the last cage door open. "Gabe, take the lead. Find the tunnel you showed us earlier." Just as they began to gather the children, a harsh voice rang out from the shadows. "Well, ain't this touchin'?" it drawled. Vaughn stepped forward, his grin sharp as broken glass. In his hand was a coiled whip, black and glistening. Ayana's blood ran cold. The rescuer would now have to become the warrior.
The chamber turned deathly still, the only sound the crackle of Vaughn's whip as he unfurled it with a slow, deliberate motion. His shadow stretched long on the wall, a vulture waiting to strike. "You should have stayed on that ranch, little Apache," he sneered, eyes glinting with cruelty. "Now I'll have to teach you all over again what pain feels like." Ayanna eased the boy from her arms and set him behind Wyatt. Her body moved instinctively, like a panther preparing to strike. She could feel the old terror clawing at her chest, the memory of Vaughn's voice in the dark cellars of the camp. But tonight, fear would not win. "Wyatt, take them and go," she whispered, her gaze never leaving Vaughn. "I'm not leaving you," Wyatt said firmly, stepping beside her with his rifle raised. The strain in his voice betrayed both fear and determination. "We end this together!" Vaughn lashed out suddenly, the whip slicing through the air with a sound like tearing flesh. Wyatt ducked, but the tip caught his shoulder, ripping through his shirt and leaving a welt of raw pain. He gritted his teeth, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Stay behind me," he barked, but Ayanna was already moving. She darted sideways, using the shadows and the broken beams for cover. Her hand closed around a length of iron pipe from the wreckage. Another crack of the whip cut the air, grazing her arm and drawing blood, but she didn't falter. "You'll never touch them again," she hissed, circling him like a predator. Wyatt, seeing Vaughn's attention fixed on Ayanna, aimed for the lantern hanging above. He fired once, the bullet shattered glass and sent burning oil raining down. Flames leapt to life along the old wood, casting the chamber in a hellish glow. The distraction was enough. Ayanna lunged, swinging the iron bar with every ounce of strength in her body. It connected with Vaughn's arm, the whip clattering to the ground. He roared in pain, but before he could recover, she drove her shoulder into his chest, slamming him back against a timber post. Wyatt grabbed Gabe, shielding him as the flames spread. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted. Ayanna delivered one final blow, knocking Vaughn to the ground, unconscious or worse. Her chest heaved, her eyes wild with adrenaline. She turned to Wyatt, nodding. "Let's finish this." The roar of the fire carried through the compound, but another sound cut through the chaos, a measured, heavy set of footsteps. Harrison Wells emerged from the shadows of the corridor, dressed not like a bandit, but like a man of wealth, his dark coat spotless despite the dirt and blood all around. His revolver gleamed in one hand, but it was the cold smile on his face that made the air feel heavier. "Well, well," Wells drawled, his voice smooth and venomous. "The soldier and the savage, quite the pair." His gaze swept over Ayanna, lingering with a sense of ownership that made her skin crawl. "You're costing me a fortune, girl. Do you have any idea what you're worth?" Wyatt stepped forward, his rifle held low but ready. "She's not property, Wells. No one is." His voice was steady, though his body trembled with pain from Vaughn's earlier strike. Wells tilted his head, feigning amusement. "Well, well," Wells drawled, his voice smooth and venomous. "The soldier and the savage, quite the pair." His gaze swept over Ayanna, lingering with a sense of ownership that made her skin crawl. "You're costing me a fortune, girl. Do you have any idea what you're worth?" Wyatt stepped forward, his rifle held low but ready. "She's not property, Wells. No one is." His voice was steady, though his body trembled with pain from Vaughn's earlier strike. Wells tilted his head, feigning amusement. "I could make you a rich man, Callahan. Take the girl and the boy back, and I'll pay you triple what you spent to buy her. Walk away, and you'll never have to work that ranch another day in your life." Wyatt's jaw clenched. The memories of war, of seeing men sold, whipped, and broken, burned inside him like the fire now raging around them. He lowered his rifle, but not as a sign of surrender. He simply wanted his words to hit harder than any bullet. "You think money can cover the blood on your hands?" he said, his voice quiet, almost a prayer. "I've seen what happens to men like you. God's justice always finds them, whether by fire, by bullet, or by the weight of their own sins. Tonight, you'll face all three." Wells' expression hardened, the charm dropping from his face like a mask. "So be it," he snarled, raising his gun. The moment froze, flames reflected in Wells' eyes, Ayanna's breath sharp in her throat. Then a shot rang out. Wyatt dove aside, but Wells wasn't aiming for him. His bullet splintered the beam near Ayanna's head. She spun, her hand grabbing the revolver Wyatt had given her earlier. Her shot came fast and true, grazing Wells' hand and knocking his weapon to the ground. "You will never own me," Ayanna said, her voice steady and unyielding. "Not now, not ever." Wells backed away, clutching his bleeding hand, eyes full of both fear and rage. The fire crackled louder, eating away at the timbers. Wyatt glanced at Ayanna, a silent agreement passing between them. It was time to end this, for good. The compound trembled as flames devoured the old timbers, collapsing roofs and sending showers of sparks into the night. The air was thick with smoke, stinging their eyes and throats. Wyatt grabbed Gabe by the shoulder, urging him forward, while Ayanna lifted a small girl from one of the cages, the child's frail body almost weightless in her arms. "Go! Keep low!" Wyatt shouted over the roar of the fire. The path to the exit was chaos. Men from Wells' gang were scattering, some trying to save the stash of stolen goods, others simply running from the inferno. Ayanna moved like a shadow, slipping between the collapsing beams, her every step driven by the cries of the children behind her. Gabe held a boy's hand tightly, guiding him through the smoke, his own face grim with determination. A gunshot cracked from behind. Wells' voice bellowed through the flames. "Callahan, you can't run forever!" Wyatt turned, his rifle raised. The light of the burning compound painted Wells in shades of hellfire. The man's face was twisted with fury, his coat now torn and scorched. He fired again, the bullet grazing Wyatt's side. Pain ripped through Wyatt, but he stood his ground, returning fire. His shot hit a support beam above Wells, and with a groan of splintering wood, the beam collapsed, trapping Wells beneath the rubble. Ayanna's breath caught as she watched Wells struggle under the wreckage, his curses drowned by the roar of fire. For a moment, she saw not a monster, but a broken man, consumed by his greed and cruelty. She whispered a prayer under her breath, not for him, but for all the souls lost in this place. "Wyatt, we have to go," she called. Wyatt nodded, clutching his side, and together they pushed through the last of the flames. The cool night air hit them like salvation. Behind them, the compound roared, a pillar of fire rising into the starless sky, a funeral pyre for Wells' empire of cruelty. On a ridge beyond the burning compound, the children huddled together, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire. Wyatt sank to one knee, exhausted, while Ayanna set the girl down gently. Gabe stood beside them, silent but unbroken. Ayanna looked back at the flames. "It's over," she murmured. But deep in her heart, she knew the journey had only just begun. Thank you for staying with the story this far. If it left an impression on you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. The night's chaos had ended in smoke and silence. The abandoned mine, once a place of torment, lay smoldering behind them. Ashes drifted in the morning air, mingling with the pale light of dawn as Wyatt, Ayanna, and Gabe led the rescued children toward the small mission church nestled in a shallow valley. The journey was slow. The children were weak, their bare feet bruised and torn. But every step away from that dark place felt like a step toward freedom. The mission appeared like a sanctuary carved from another world, a whitewashed adobe chapel with a modest wooden cross rising against the desert sky. The church's bell tower stood silent, yet its presence felt like a prayer answered. Father Miguel, the aging priest who kept the mission alive, saw them coming and hurried down the steps, his brown robe billowing behind him. "Dios mío," he whispered when he saw the children, his eyes glistening with both sorrow and gratitude. "Bring them inside, all of you." Inside the church, the cool stone floor and the faint scent of burning candles offered a calm contrast to the harsh wilderness outside. Ayanna knelt by a little girl with tangled hair, carefully wiping the dirt from her face with a damp cloth. The girl flinched at first, unused to a gentle touch, but Ayanna hummed softly in Apache, a lullaby her mother used to sing, and the child's breathing slowed. Wyatt moved among the pews, tending to wounds with quiet determination. His rough, calloused hands, once built for war and later for ranching, were surprisingly tender as he wrapped Gabe's injuries. The boy, still shaken but alive, glanced up at Wyatt with wide, uncertain eyes. "You're safe now," Wyatt said softly, his voice like steady gravel. "No one's gonna hurt you again." Ayanna watched Wyatt for a moment. In the flickering candlelight, he looked older than she had first thought, but also kinder. There was a strength in him that wasn't just muscle and bone. It was something deeper, carved into his soul by suffering and faith. When the children were fed and resting, Ayanna stepped outside. The first rays of sun crept over the mesas, painting the desert in shades of gold and copper. The wind was cool and carried the scent of mesquite. For a long time she stood there, staring at the horizon, her chest rising and falling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Freedom? Relief? Or was it something larger, like grace? She sank to her knees, pressing her palms into the earth. In her own language, she whispered words she hadn't spoken since she was a child. "Thank you," she said to the rising sun, to the spirits of her ancestors, and perhaps to the God she had seen Wyatt pray to so often. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to feel true. For the first time since her tribe was torn apart, Ayanna prayed. Behind her, Wyatt stepped out, his boots crunching on the sandy ground. He didn't speak, only stood a few feet away, watching her. After a moment, he lowered his head, tipping his hat in a quiet, unspoken gesture of reverence, not just for her prayer, but for her strength. When she rose, their eyes met. "You believe in him," Ayanna said softly, her accent wrapping around the English words. "In your God." "I do," Wyatt answered, his voice low. "And I reckon he was with us last night, or we wouldn't be standing here now." Ayanna nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. Perhaps she didn't fully understand his God, but she felt something shift inside her, a small flame of hope, fragile yet warm. They returned to the church together. The children were asleep, curled up under old wool blankets, their breathing steady. Gabe, still awake, gave Ayanna a faint smile, the first she had seen from him since they'd met. It was a small thing, but it pierced her heart like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. That morning, as the church bell finally rang for the first time in months, Ayanna felt as though the sound was not just a call to prayer, but a promise life could begin again. The mission came alive with the soft sounds of morning, children stirring, Father Miguel humming a hymn as he prepared bread, and the low murmur of Wyatt speaking to a local deputy who had arrived to gather statements. Wells and his men would face the law now, their cruelty exposed. It would take time, but justice had been set in motion. Outside, the desert was washed in the warm glow of late morning. Ayanna stood near the church's corral, her hand resting on the neck of a tall chestnut mare. The animal nickered softly, sensing the calm that had replaced days of terror. Wyatt approached, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his weathered face shadowed beneath his hat. "You drink this?" he asked, holding out the mug. "It's bitter as sin, but it wakes you up." Ayanna accepted it with a small smile. "Coffee," she said, pronouncing the word carefully. "Better than the water in the camp." "Everything's better than that place," Wyatt muttered. His gaze shifted toward the horizon, where smoke still faintly marked the ruins of Wells' compound. But it's over now. For a long while, they stood in silence, sipping coffee, the quiet between them comfortable rather than strained. Ayanna could feel something new growing between them, a trust that hadn't been there before, built not just on gratitude, but on shared wounds and the stubborn will to survive. When Wyatt finally spoke, his voice carried both hesitation and sincerity. "You don't owe me anything, Ayanna. You're free to go wherever you want now. There's a train passing through Tucson next week. If you want, I can take you there." She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes steady. "You think I will leave?" He shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I wouldn't blame you if you did. This land," he gestured to the dry hills and open sky, "it's hard, unforgiving. Not much of a life for someone who's already lost too much." Ayanna studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "I have no tribe to return to, no family left. But," she hesitated, as if weighing each word, "I feel something here. Peace. Maybe it is from your God, or maybe it is just you." Wyatt's breath caught, though he tried to hide it with a faint chuckle. "I'm not much of a reason to stay." "You are more than you think," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You see me not as a slave, not as a savage. You see me." Something in her words reached deep into him, brushing against the places he thought had gone numb after the war. For years, Wyatt had carried a hollow ache, losing his brother, watching the world fracture into cruelty and greed. But standing there, with Ayanna's steady gaze on him, he felt something shift. A reason to keep fighting, a reason to keep living. Later that afternoon, the children were taken under the care of Father Miguel and local townsfolk, who promised to find homes for them. Gabe clung to Ayanna before leaving, his small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. "Will I see you again?" he asked, voice trembling. Ayanna knelt and brushed his hair back gently. "Yes," she said, "you will see me. You will always be part of my heart." When evening fell, Wyatt saddled 2 horses. The sky blazed with orange and crimson, the colors of both endings and beginnings. Ayanna mounted the mare she had tamed earlier, her posture proud and strong. Wyatt climbed onto his own horse, glancing at her with a quiet smile. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at the horizon, where the last light of the sun kissed the land. "Yes," she replied. "Ready." As they rode side by side across the open plain, a hush fell over the world, broken only by the rhythm of hooves and the whisper of the wind. Ayanna felt a hymn rise in her heart, not a song of her people, nor the church's hymn, but something in between. A song of survival, freedom, and faith. The past would always leave scars, but the future stretched wide before them, like the endless desert under the stars. Step into true Wild West stories, where the untamed frontier holds not just dust and gunpowder, but tales that touch the heart, stir deep nostalgia, and honor timeless faith. Each story is a whisper from the past, inviting you to remember, feel, and believe once more.